The Atlanta Braves do have money left to spend this winter, but odds are they're going to wait for a while before they use it. And let me tell you why. Yes, welcome on into Braves Today, your daily source for news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby, award-winning baseball writer and podcaster, also the founder and creator of BravesToday.com, your daily Atlanta Braves newsletter, because Braves Today is both a podcast and a newsletter. We're proudly part of the Believe Podcast Network and presented to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app or go to FanDuel.com to get started. There was a couple comments that I saw going around Monday and Tuesday around Braves country about how things have been quiet, that Atlanta had a flurry of activity in November and December, and then not really much has happened since then. So let's talk about the money the Braves have spent, the fact that they do have money left, but what they're waiting on before they make any more additions to the roster. Because the Braves have been pretty busy. If you look at what they did in free agency, you lost your full-time designated hitter in Marcell Ozuna, and then you let two relievers go by declining their club options. You brought back closer Raisel Iglesias. He went to free agency, you brought him back. You paired him with another closer in Robert Suarez. You brought back Ha-Seong Kim for shortstop after you had him for, just under a month to end the season. You brought in a platoon outfielder in Mike Yastrzemski, one who hits righties really well, can play all three defensive positions. You traded for one of the league's best utility men, Mauricio Dubon, who, by the way, can hit lefties really well. And when you look at the cash payroll right now, the Braves are projected for about $261 million in cash payroll right now. That's already an improvement on last season. They finished last season somewhere around 215 or so in actual cash payroll, with a CBT number that was a little bit higher, but still below the threshold. They reset their CBT obligation. So any sort of luxury tax, they're being taxed at the lowest rate because it's their first year over. And they are already over. The competitive balance tax payroll figure for this year is actually $255.7 million. Now, those are different because they're calculated differently. The payroll number, the 261 I told you, is the sum of the actual money being paid in 2026 to each player, right? So Jurickson Profar is getting $15 million. Spencer Strider is getting $20 million. Ronald Acuna Jr. is getting $17 million. Renato Lopez is getting $14 and all of that stuff. But every single one of those players I mentioned, their CBT hit, for the most part, is lower than their cash payroll. Because the CBT, the competitive balance tax calculation, is not based on the actual cash they received this year. It's based on the average annual value. If you sign a 5-year deal for $100 million, that is an average of $20 million a year. But the team doesn't have to pay you exactly $20 million a year. They can pay you less early, they can pay you more late, and so you get into a situation where the CBT number is higher earlier than what you're actually making because they're paying you small amounts. And as your salary increases later in the deal, the CBT figure is different from what you're actually making. So like this year, okay, when you look at some of these, Spencer Strider is a great example of what I'm talking about. His salary for 2026 is $20 million. But his CBT hit, his average annual value for the deal, remember he signed for 6 years and $75 million. The actual AAV of the deal is only $12.5 million. And that is because his last 3 years are market rates, $20 million this year, the Atlanta max of $22 million in both 27 and 28. But in the first 2 years of the deal, 2023 and 2024, he made exactly $1 million. Those were pre-arbitration years. That was still a pay raise over what he would have made were he just on the league minimum, $780,000 salary? And so now he is more expensive from a cash perspective, but his cap hit is lower. It's the same situation with a lot of guys, right? Ronald Acuna Jr., $17 million in cash, $12.5 million on the luxury tax. Ronaldo Lopez, $10 million on the luxury tax, $14 million in cash. A lot of guys are in the same situation. So what that means is, again, the actual cash is $261. The CBT figure is $255 and change. And the reason why I bring up the CBT figure and I want to talk about that, even though Alex Anthopoulos says they care about the cash, they care about the cash going out the door, I want to talk about the CBT figure because their limit has been imposed by the CBT. The way this works, the very first level, the luxury tax kicks in at $244 million. And there are escalators every $20 million. So from 244 through 263,999,999, whatever, you just pay the base level tax. If you go into that second tier, which starts at $20 million over the base of 244, it's an additional penalty on top of that. As Atlanta is in the first year of going over, because they reset it last year, they will pay a 20% tax on the money over the 244. They don't pay a 20% tax on everything. They pay a 20% tax on the money over 244. So if you go $1 million over, your tax is $200,000. When you get into that second tier, that money, the 20 to the 40 million, is an additional 12% surcharge. So it goes from 20% to 32%. But here's the thing. At the third level, not only do the surcharges go up again, but other penalties come in place. And the biggest one is your highest selection in the draft is moved back 10 spots. And Alex Anthopoulos several different times has said that is not something he wants to do. They're okay with paying extra money for tax. It's just a line item on your payroll. But having your draft pick move back is a much bigger deal. The quote here, quote, if you have these teams that are well over, you're losing draft position and things like that, there is a real opportunity cost there. The opportunity cost for us is dollars. It's not, in my view, the same as moving back in the draft. He's very clear. They do not want to go into the third tier. The last time they spent close to it, they came within $1 million of going over, but they didn't go over. So if we use that third tier at $284 million, that's how much where that tier starts. If we assume that is the absolute max that this team will spend this offseason, and they're just now under 256, they've got $28 million left. What are they going to spend that money on? I think I know, and I'll tell you next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel's come out with their division odds. The Braves are tied for second in the East behind the Phillies. Brewers favored to win the Central, barely ahead of the Cubs, though. Two-team race there. Dodgers are far and away the favorites in the NL West. That makes a lot of sense. The American League, the West is a two-team race, they think, between Seattle and Houston. Texas is a distant third. You look at the Central, three-team race. Tigers, Royals, Guardians in that order. You look at the AL East, Yankees are somehow still the favorite over Toronto. I feel like that's a mistake. Is this the Aaron Judge effect? Is this the New York market? I don't quite know what it is, but they've got Yankees, Blue Jays, Red Sox, and really the Orioles all kind of within striking distance, and the Tampa Bay a distant fifth. If you feel like there's some of these that they're not giving enough attention to an underdog, or there's good value to be had, go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today to place your bet. Welcome back to Braves Today, Lindsay Crosby. Let's talk about what Atlanta's going to use that $28 million for. Because it sounds like, oh man, you can really go out, you can't get a Kyle Tucker with that, but you can get almost anybody else in the market that you want if you have close to $28 million available. But here's the thing. The first thing to keep in mind is Atlanta always saves money for the trade deadline. Alex Anthopoulos does not want to get to the trade deadline and not be able to pull the trigger on a move because he doesn't have the money. And he's said every time he's gone to ownership for money, they've given it to him. But again, he doesn't want to go over that third CBT tier and take the draft pick penalties. Atlanta, this year notwithstanding, Atlanta's usually always picking in the mid-20s, and so having that first pick move back a bunch ends up being impactful not only from a bonus perspective, but also from the caliber of talent you can get there. So I get it. It makes sense. And if you look at the last four the last four competitive years, so not looking at 25, that was a weird trade deadline. All you got was Tyler Kinley. You were trying to sell and didn't do it. If you go back and you look at 21 through 24 and who you got at the deadline and how much money you spent, it makes a lot of sense that $10 million is kind of what they want to hold aside here, okay? In 24, you got Jorge Soler and you got Luke Jackson. The combined salary there was about $4.5 million. Now, you did send some money back to San Francisco to offset some of what Luke Jackson was making. So it's not exactly $4.5 million, but that's what you paid those two guys at the deadline. In 2023, you got Brad Hand, you got Nicky Lopez, and you brought in Pierce Johnson from Colorado. It came out to about $3.7 million. Both of those are less than $10 million. Yes, I'll admit that. But talking to Alex Anthopoulos after those trade deadlines, it really felt like they were trying to get deals done and couldn't, and they were willing to spend more money and just couldn't find the deals, especially in 24. He kind of talked about that. 2022, you used all of that $10 million plus some. They got Raisel Iglesias and Jake Odorizzi as far as right-handed pitchers. They got Robbie Grossman for the outfield, and they went and got infielder Ehire Adrianza back. And that was over $12 million in salary for the rest of the season on those four guys. So they went over the $10 million kind of buffer there on that. In 21, this is the famous trade deadline we all think about. Like, yeah, you got Stephen Vogt, you got right-hand pitcher Richard Rodriguez, but you got Jorge Soler, Adam Duvall, Jock Peterson, and Eddie Rosario. I know Jock was a couple weeks before the deadline, but I'm grouping that all in there. And together, you paid those six players just under $10 million from acquisition through the end of the season. So a $10 million goal of a contingency fund, I'm going to call it, makes a lot of sense, right? I absolutely see why they want to have that much money. So if you take the $10 million out, now you're looking at $18 million left. And the $18 million, that amount really changes what you can do. And this makes a lot of sense now. The report I talked about yesterday here on the show from Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic, that the Braves are one of 5 teams trying to get Freddie Peralta, makes a lot more sense now if you think about it, because his salary for 2026 is $8 million. If you have $18 million left and the only type of starter you want to add is an impact starter, Freddie Peralta costs $8 million. And with the reachable escalators in the deal, if he wins a Cy Young as an all-star and wins a Gold Glove, he'd max out at like $8.725 million. For the record, there are some other escalators in there that he's not going to get. Silver Slugger, Reliever of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year. He's not going to get those incentives. But the other things he could get, right? If you win the World Series and he's the MVP of that and the League Championship Series, he maxes out at that 8.725 is what he would get. So getting an impact starter via trade would make sense if it's Freddie Peralta because he's affordable. And there's more guys besides just Peralta that would fit in that same kind of space. Edward Cabrera of the Miami Marlins is also not being paid double-digit millions per season. Mackenzie Gore of the Washington Nationals. Joe Ryan of the Minnesota Twins. Those are all supposedly available starters this winter who are being paid either on more affordable deals they signed when they hadn't quite broken out, or they're arbitration eligible and they're making less money. So those are the type of impact starters you could add via trade and still make it work under this dollar figure. This total $28 million, but when you take out the $10 million contingency fund, you've really got about $18 million left to spend. You could acquire any of those guys and it makes sense. The issue is this probably has to be a trade. Because here's every single starting pitcher that signed for $18 million or less this winter. $18 million AAV or less this winter. Ready? Dustin May signed with the St. Louis Cardinals. He's making $12.5 million. Cody Ponce came back from the KBO and signed with Toronto for $11 million. Adrian Hauser went from Tampa Bay to San Francisco for $11 million. Tyler Mahle went from Texas to San Francisco for $10 million. Zach Eflin re-signed with Baltimore for $10 million. Steven Matz went from Boston to Tampa Bay for $7.5 million. And Drew Anderson left the KBO to come back to Detroit. He'd been with them in 24 when they released him to go sign in the KBO. He came back from the KBO for $7 million. There's some intriguing names. I think I wrote something in the season still about how I wouldn't mind taking a flyer on Dustin May as some sort of project guy for the bullpen, and maybe you try to fix him as a starter. But here's the thing. None of those pitchers fit the definition of an impact starter that's going to push down any of your existing options, right? Chris Sale, Spencer Schwellenbach, Spencer Strider, Ronaldo Lopez. You're not pushing any of those guys back if you add one of these. Any one of those names I listed off, those are all number 5 starters. None of those guys are going to be in your top 4. It's the same as signing a back-end guy. And here's the thing. A lot of the back-end guys, affordability-wise, don't fit with that $18 million as well. Think about Chris Bassett. He's been making $20 and $22 million the last couple seasons. Are you going to get him at a discount of $18 million? Odds are you're not. You can get a guy via trade. Like you can still, even if you don't get one of the guys that I mentioned, which I understand why you wouldn't get a Cabrera or a Gore because a lot of those guys are in the division. But even if you are able to go out and get somebody, even if you can't go out and get one of those guys, you can absolutely still make a trade for somebody. Pablo Lopez is owed $21.5 million. You just have to either accept a smaller contingency fund, which doesn't really feel like something Alex Anthopoulos is going to want to do. You have to get his original team to keep some money in the deal, which means you probably end up having to give better prospects. Or you have to find a way to shed a salary like Aaron Bummer, who's making $9.5 million. If you were to trade for a Pablo Lopez, you take Aaron Bummer out of the bullpen, the money still works because yes, it's $21.5 million you're adding, but you're subtracting 9.5. So the money still works. I do think it's important to point out here, for CBT purposes, Bummer is only $6.5 million. The math still works out though. It still comes out to $15 million in CBT obligations added if you pick up a Pablo Lopez and dump an Aaron Bummer. I just don't think you're going to get a team to take all of Bummer's money or even a majority of it. So there are options here. Like you're not completely locked out of getting an impact starter. You're just locked out of getting an impact starter in free agency. You have to get in, and I'm honestly not convinced there really is impact starters left in free agency, except for maybe Framber Valdez and maybe Zach Gowen if you can fix him. And I don't think either one of those guys is worth giving up a $3.5 million slot bonus on a top 30 pick to get. But in just a minute, outside of the Freddie Peralta search or trade efforts, I really do think there's a very logical explanation of what they're waiting on, and it involves the team doctors. We'll talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of Braves Today. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's been a fantastic week now that we're all back. We're all back to work. We're on the march from now to spring training. Pitchers and catchers will report earlier this year because of the World Baseball Classic. The Braves have not sent us the official schedule yet. Normally, they report really close to Valentine's Day, like 13th, 14th, 15th. I imagine it's probably a little bit earlier, but they've not yet given us that schedule. So I'll tell you guys as soon as we get it. I think the reason Atlanta's holding on to this money and not really making any deals is they're trying to figure out which of their injured players they need to reinforce that position. So the rotation actually, AA told us, quote, on paper, we're in pretty good shape because of the positive reports on Grant Holmes, on Ronaldo Lopez, on Spencer Schwellenbach. All three of those guys have had a normal offseason. They all look good, and they all should be available with no restrictions in spring. But the injury concerns that we are aware of and that we're tracking, Sean Murphy and Joe Jimenez. So you remember Sean Murphy had a torn hip labrum. He had surgery in September. The team initially said they were looking at like a 4 to 5 month thing, and he should be available in spring training without many restrictions. I talked to a hip surgeon, a hip preservation specialist. He's a sports medicine surgeon, used to be the official surgeon of the Chicago White Sox. And he told me that that is a very optimistic timeline. And so I was talking back in September on the show, in the newsletter, about how Sean Murphy more than likely was going to miss some regular season time before he's ready to go. Alex Anthopoulos talked to MLB Network Radio late in December and said the same thing. He said the same thing in December that I was telling you in September. Sean Murphy's probably going to miss a little bit of the season. The question here is how much. It's a similar conversation about Joe Jimenez, who missed all of 2025 because of the rehab from I think it was a torn knee ligament or torn knee cartilage that he had surgery on after the 2024 season. And they were trying to get him back later in the year, partly because the team was bad, partly because he had a setback. He ended up never pitching for the Braves last season, and then had a cleanup procedure at the end of the year to take care of scar tissue and some of the other stuff that comes up in some of these things. And so those two guys are outstanding question marks right now. We don't know what their status is going to be. And them being ready for the regular season or not, I think will significantly impact, or I guess how much time they might miss of the regular season is going to impact where the team spends that final $18 million or some of that $18 million, right? If Sean Murphy's out for 3 weeks or a month or whatever of the regular season, that's how much he misses between a slower ramp up and then a rehab stint before he debuts. I think the Braves are happy to just let Drake Baldwin play 5 games a week. He catches probably 4 behind the plate, DHs 1, maybe he gets a full day off, maybe they just use the off days. They just ride Drake Baldwin a little bit harder with the knowledge that they'll have Sean Murphy and they can kind of recalibrate Baldwin's workload if they need to mid-season. And one of the guys you have on the roster right now can be the backup. Guys who have experience, you have Chadwick Tromp, he's back. They re-signed Sandy Leone. And then you have some minor leaguers who have not debuted. Adam Zabrowski, Tyler Tolvey, Austin Machado. They tried to sign Austin Nola they did sign Austin Nola early in the offseason to a minor league deal. He was our very first free agent signing, actually. And the thought process for me was, okay, he's another veteran catcher option that can take you into 26 if Murphy's not ready. but they later released him from that deal so he could go be the bullpen coach for the Seattle Mariners. My first thought is, if Sean Murphy's going to miss 3 weeks or whatever, you just roll with a Tromp or Leone for a couple weeks, and then you add Murphy when he's ready. But if Sean Murphy's going to miss 6 weeks or something, 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever, you probably need to go out and get, I'm not going to say an actual catcher because those guys are actual catchers, but get somebody with more major league experience who can actually be decent back there, and somebody where if you were to suffer an injury, you wouldn't be afraid to have them be the primary guy for a week or so until you could get like Baldwin back in there or something, right? Not that they're going to be awesome, but like an Austin Barnes, Elias Diaz, Victor Caratini was in Houston last year. We just hired former catcher Martin Maldonado for a front office position. Reportedly, he's not going to be playing. He's not an option to fill in for Murphy if Murphy's out, but he was, longtime starting catcher for the Astros. Offensively, terrible. Defensively, very, very good. It's why he played for so long. So Victor Caratini was one of the catchers there in Houston. Maybe that's the guy. Don't quite know who it would be, but you could see them pulling aside a $1.5, $2 million bucks or whatever money's required to go out and get at least another veteran on a split contract, a non-guaranteed deal, to be here during spring training and be another option for 2026. If Sean Murphy's out for longer, if Sean Murphy legitimately is going to miss actual time, you can see the Braves trying to be maybe a little more aggressive at getting like a number 2 catcher to sit there and work behind Baldwin, and be a guy who could actually play for you more than just twice a month or once a week or whatever. None of these guys are going to start over Drake Baldwin, but like a Jonah Heim or a Mitch Garver, like somebody with a little higher ceiling, I could see as the guy that they have to go spend real money to get if Sean Murphy has a setback or whatever and is going to miss a majority of the season. Because again, if Drake Baldwin's the guy and he gets hurt, you can't just roll with Tromp or Leone. And AA has talked before about being scarred from 2021, where they had to use like 5 different catchers just to get through the season. So if the early reports from very early in spring training are, when pitchers and catchers report, or even before that, from Murphy are not positive, depending on how long they think he'll miss, they could just sign a veteran, Christian Vasquez, formerly of the Twins, maybe. Or they may go out and they may get somebody who they're comfortable keeping all year, like a Jonah Heim or a Mitch Garver. Same thing with Joe Jimenez. If they kind of feel like, okay, Joe Jimenez is going to be back sooner rather than later, maybe even opening day, they may not be counting on him for leverage innings immediately, but they can still, he can still be a valuable part of the bullpen and help answer some of those middle relief questions you had. I broke it down really well in the newsletter. I mentioned it on Monday, but you've got Iglesias and Suarez and Lee, and then after them, there's a lot of questions here. Is it a Joel Pyops? Is it an Aaron Bummer? Is that where Grant Holmes slots in? Is James Karinchak back? There's a lot of questions about the middle innings, your 4th leverage arm, and some of those other guys. If Jimenez is healthy, you can slot him in right there. But if he's not, or they think he's healthy enough to play, but they don't want to rely on him for leverage, you can go out and you can sign an actual reliever. Most of the guys with closing experience are already off the board. Well, guess what? You've got 2 guys with closing experience. Theoretically, you should be covered. But you could go out and you could get somebody. One, you could bring back a Pierce Johnson or a Tyler Kinley. I kind of talked on here why I don't think they're going to do that. But you could go out and you could get somebody like a Paul Sewald if you wanted. Ryan Stanek, Andrew Chafin. Ryan Stanek was with the Mets, so Jeremy Hefner ostensibly knows him. You go grab a Taylor Rogers. I've been advocating for them to look at former White Sox starter turned Dodgers reliever Michael Kopech. Flamethrower. He wasn't healthy a lot last year, but when he got traded to LA in 24, I think, he looked pretty good with them before he got hurt and missed a lot of last season. There's other former Mets you could grab, Drew Smith, maybe a Max Kranick, somebody like that. Guys that Jeremy Hefner already knows. Jose Castillo is a former Met that he probably knows. You've got options out there if you get a bad report on Jimenez or get a okay report and don't want to trust him as the fourth leverage reliever. You can go out and grab some other guys that you're familiar with or some names, dudes with stuff like a Kopech, whoever it might be, knowing that you're not counting on them to close and you're not counting on them to be high leverage guys. You're counting on them for middle leverage, the seventh from time to time and things like that. But the problem you have here, as I mentioned earlier, is when you factor in that contingency fund, you're looking at like $18 million left to spend. So I don't think a Framber Valdez is going to happen. I don't think a Zach Gallen is going to happen. I don't think a Bo Bichette's going to, none of that stuff's going to happen, more than likely, because to do that, you're going to have to bail on some money. You're going to have to get rid of some money somewhere, get rid of Aaron Bummer somehow, and most of his salary. You're also going to need, that also would mean you don't have money left for the trade deadline. If there's anything we've learned about Alex Anthopoulos, it's that he is incredibly sensitive to depth and having the ability to do multiple things. He has options for different scenarios. He can go do this, he can go do that. He has the funds to take care of what he needs. And again, he's told us every time he's gone to ask for money, he's been given the money. But he's also told us he does not want to go over that third tier because of the draft pick penalties. So $28 million left before you get there. $10 million to save for the deadline means $18 million. Pull off a great trade. Get Freddie Peralta. That fixes a lot of these problems. Because your rotation is one of the best in baseball, and that's another person you can pop into the pen. But if you can't make a deal for a no-doubt starter like that, which would fix your bullpen questions as well, then you probably need to wait until pitchers and catchers report to see how Joe Jimenez and Sean Murphy are doing. This has been Braves Today for Wednesday, January 7th. Do me a favor, you're listening on audio, leave a 5-star review, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, sorry, Ben, it's just been all over. I don't know why he can't settle. He's been in the chair, on the floor, all around. But also, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when we drop the next episode, we drop a short, we go bonus, we do lives, all that kind of stuff. And as always, subscriptions over at bravestoday.com. That's the daily newsletter. Usually this content is different from the newsletter content. So bravestoday.com, free or paid, that helps us out a ton. That's how we fund reporting trips. That's how we plan out where we're going to go visit, who we're going to go talk to, and all the fun stuff we're going to try to bring you in 2026, like visits to the affiliates and all of that stuff. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.